Were you ever curious about what life was like during the Renaissance period? The Renaissance, also known as the rebirth of European culture, art, and learning, during the 14th to 17th centuries, represented the bridge between the Middle Ages and modern history. The word rebirth comes from the French meaning of the word Renaissance, which translates to the Italian term rinascita. The birthplace of the Renaissance is in Florence, Italy, which was also the main center of artists at the time. In this video, we'll discuss the daily lives of women during the Renaissance. And to be specific, we'll be going over different types of women groups during the Renaissance period, such as royalty, noblewomen, servants, and scholars. To start, we'll talk about the women in upper class, as they include noblewomen and the royalty. Female roles were more sharply defined in upper class society than in lower class society. The main reason was economic. Upper class daughters, wives, and widows had a share in the family estate, so they were regarded mainly as a way to hold on to or expand their political wealth. Therefore, their lives were strictly regulated and controlled. In contrast, lower class women generally had more freedom, surprisingly enough. Wives, daughters, and even widows were actively involved in helping to support the family by maintaining the household, taking care of children, and working along with men on the farm or in the shop. Therefore, it was not practical to regulate and control their lives. To get a better insight into the day in the life of noblewomen during the Renaissance period, we have to read the letters of Isabella and the Book of Hours by Catherine of Cleves. They both show a deeper look into the lives of noblewomen as they talk about their experiences and perspective on their lives through their writings. As the Duchess of Guelders, Catherine uses manuscript to blend her religious devotion with her high social standing. The Hours of Catherine of Cleves is the greatest Dutch illuminated manuscript in the world. The manuscript Catherine commissioned is a prayer book containing an unusually rich series of devotions illustrated with especially elaborate suites of miniatures. All the miniatures are filled with great detail. The book followed the 8 canonical hours of the liturgical day. Most noblewomen woke up and rose from bed around 6 a.m., which is prime hours being the hour right after sunrise. And for Catherine of Cleves in this case, the morning routine after getting out of bed consisted of being dressed by her ladies in wed and washing her face and hands with scented water and heading to her private orrery to begin the day's first daylight prayers in her Book of Hours. Prayers happened throughout the day even more and ended the evening with even more religious devotion before bed. The book depicts that Catherine wore rich fabrics and elaborate heraldic shields of the Burgundian nobility. The diet for noblewomen and high-class women consisted of mussels, fruits, fishes, and birds. These were very luxurious compared to the lower-class people. Despite this high status, they worked on tasks like milking cows, selling wine, and baking bread. While the Book of Hours makes life look like a series of quiet, kneeling prayers, Catherine's life was quite different. Catherine's workday started immediately after prime. This was because she had political conflicts with her husband, Duke Arnold. Her morning likely involved meeting with advisors, managing the finances of her estates, and navigating the political legislative deadlocks of the 15th century Dutch courts, as war between her and her husband sparked when their only living son, Adolf, was disinherited by her husband, Arnold. So what makes the Hours of Catherine of Cleves so significant? While most Book of Hours focus strictly on the divine, Catherine's manuscript is obsessed with the physical world. Most religious art of the time kept backgrounds gold or abstract. Catherine's artist painted the actual rooms and tools a noblewoman would recognize. The baby walker, for example. One of the most famous miniatures shows the Virgin Mary knitting while the Christ child plays in a wooden, 3-wheeled baby walker. This shows that noble nurseries use sophisticated mobility aids for toddlers, and this was one of the most technological advances at the time. We can also see the economy that is mentioned in Catherine's life. Through the book's illustration of saints, we see the economic world Catherine managed. In the margins, you see coins, purses, and even a scene of a woman selling wine. The manuscript highlights the tools of various trades, like baskets, weaving tools, and cages, reflecting the Dutch's role as a patron and administrator of the local economy. While Catherine of Cleves offers a visual snapshot of the Renaissance, the letters of Isabella d'Este, the First Lady of the Renaissance, provide the high-definition, behind-the-scenes commentary. Like Catherine, Isabella followed the liturgical hours, but her letters revealed she was an exhausted multitasker. She often wrote late into the night or early morning to keep up with her correspondence. She was known to be a restless traveler, frequently moving between Mantua, Milan, and Rome, often complaining about the quality of beds and accommodation in her letters. Isabella was a perfume and cosmetic fanatic. Her letters are filled with recipes for scented waters, teeth whitening powders, and skin creams. She famously sent servants across Italy to find specific oils and musk, viewing a pleasant scent for it as a shield against the perceived bad air of the era. For Isabella, getting dressed was a press conference. Isabella used fashion as a diplomatic weaponry. Her letters describe her caligara and gowns embroidered with personal emblems like musical rest or lottery tickets. Her letters mention local delicacies like straccato, disagno, which is pretty much donkey stew, and tortelli di zucca, which is pumpkin pasta. Isabella cared a lot how the public viewed her. I probably said all those wrong, by the way, the food. But yeah, Isabella cared a lot about how the public viewed her. She was deeply concerned with her weight as she aged, and whenever artists would draw her, she would ask them to try to slim her down in her portraits. And artists, as in very famous artists like Leonardo da Vinci or Titanian. Her letters reveal a constant tension between the lavish banquets required for diplomacy and her personal desire to maintain noble in the public eye. One of the most significant event Isabella was actually in was when Isabella was actually in Rome when the city was brutally sacked. She turned her son's palace into a fortified refugee camp, protecting hundreds of people from the marauding soldiers while she negotiated their safety. Now, why were these letters so significant? Well, without them, we would not know many of the things we know now, as her commentary in her letters gave us so much detail and insight into her public persona and private identity, but also just little things in general, like the diet and the traveling and her political views and just what kind of perspective she had into the world that most noblewomen can't say. And basically, this was, many years ago during the 14th to 17th centuries, and without it, we would not know half the things we know right now. Fun more facts about her. She wrote 53 letters to the artist Perugino for a single painting, specifying every detail down to the height of the grass. She even tried to bully Leonardo da Vinci into finishing a portrait. He never did. Sucks to suck. But this shows that noblewomen weren't just, going out and just shopping around just for the sake of it. They loved the art, and they loved the creativity that was behind everything. They were intellectual collaborators who shaped the very aesthetic of the Renaissance. For the day in the life of a woman scholar, we will have to look into the life of Christine de Pizan. Now, unlike Catherine, who rose for social protocol, a writer like Christine often woke up before dawn, so usually around 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., to secure quiet hours before domestic duties began. They also went to bed late, often working by candlelight, which is a very significant expense. Now, Christine famously wrote about the solitude of her study as her sanctuary. Hygiene for a scholar was more functional than the perfumed armor of Isabella. They used dry washing, which basically was rubbing the skin with cloth to absorb oils. And they also used scented water, often mixed with herbs like rose or lavender. Now, these intellectual women, these scholars, they wore sober academic gowns Christine de Pizan, after she was widowed, she adopted a distinctive blue or dark gown with a white horned headdress. This basically meant seriousness and protected them from being dismissed as a mere fashion plates. It was a choice to ensure they were heard and not just seen. Now, a woman's scholar's diet included bread, vegetable stew, and wine diluted with water. They often wrote about the need for a clear head, so they avoided the heavy multi-course banquets of the court to focus on their manuscripts. So basically, heavy courses like steak, which was quite weird at the time. Well, I mean, quite weird now, but actually quite normal at the time. Their work consisted of correspondence. They spent hours writing letters to male scholars across Europe to prove their intelligence. Their greatest ally was the technological advancement, which was the printing press. For the first time, a woman's ideas could travel further than her body. However, using the printing press was a risk at the time, as publishing a book was often seen as publicly exposing oneself, which was considered scandalous for a woman at the time. The greatest hardship was, I think, the greatest hardship for women scholars at the time was the loss of their social life. To be a serious scholar, a woman usually had to remain a virgin or widow. Marriage was considered the death of the mind because the duties of a housewife were so all-consuming. Men often praised them as prodigies or miracles, which was actually an insult to them, as it implied they were freaks of nature rather than just they were naturally intelligent. So they were treated like outcasts. As they were treated like outcasts, they were still better off than the lower class society. Christine de Pizan famously interacted with the French royal court, advising the queen as she lived off the French royal court. Christine lost her husband due to a plague outbreak, forcing her to write to support her 3 children, becoming a professional writer out of sheer necessity. Now, why is she so significant? Well, Christine de Pizan was the architect of the female intellectual identity. Her significance isn't that she just wrote books and that she was just, one of the first Europe woman literature writer, but that she created a professional and psychological framework that basically allowed women scholars to exist in a world that didn't have a place for them. So shout out to her. And now, lastly, we want to go over the life of a female servant in the Renaissance, as they were the invisible engine that allowed the duchesses and scholars to exist. While Isabella was writing letters, her handmaidens, or should I say maids, were engaging in a grueling 16-hour physical marathon almost every day. A servant's day began well before the canonical hours. They typically woke up at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. to revive the fires, the most critical task of the morning. They were the last to go to sleep, often after 11 p.m., only once the great silence had fallen over the noble household and the final candles were extinguished. For a servant, hygiene was a matter of utility. They didn't have scented waters. They had lye soap, basically made from ashes and animal fat. Their hands were often chapped and raw from constant contact with water, lye, and sand. While they couldn't bathe in the noble sense, they practiced spot cleaning with coarse linen. They wore a kirtle made of durable coarse wool or futazin. They typically had, depending on what type of maid it was, they had an apron, a pouch on them to carry their belongings, tools like a knife. They also had a kerchief. It was like a white cloth that covers their hair to keep away when they were cooking or just doing their daily task. Yeah. Okay, and their work consisted of hauling and basically heating, cooking. Um, a servant woman might actually carry 50 to 100 pounds of water from a well to a kitchen in a single day, which is a lot. Um, they managed complex wood fire ovens and splits for roasting meat. They used tinder boxes to start fires and heavy cast iron cauldrons. In the laundry, they use battledores, which is basically wooden paddles to beat the dirt out of heavy fabrics, a task that required immense upper body strength. Their diet consisted of pottage, which is a thick, everlasting stew filled with grains and cabbage and leeks. And also sometimes they would get dark, dense rye bread. The most significant historical event they've been in was probably when the Black Death happened and the nobles fled to the country, and the servants were actually left behind to guard the house, but they just kind of left them in the dust to pretty much become become sick from the plague because they had pretty much nowhere to go. Studying the daily lives of Renaissance servants is significant because it reveals the hidden infrastructure of the era. Without understanding the bottom of the pretty much the social working pyramid, our view of a Renaissance is like looking at a grand palace while ignoring the pretty much the whole base foundation holding it up. This was, pretty much the birthplace or the birth of the modern working class. Not the birthplace, sorry. For a woman, being a servant was one of the only few ways to leave her village, move to a city like Florence or Paris, and earn her own savings and way to go along in her life. It was a precursor to the modern idea of career mobility and economic independence. However, it was very limited to women at the time. To sum things up, by looking at the perspectives and diving into the daily lives of these three noblewomen, the servant, and the scholar, it really shows the high definition of history that is far more vibrant and honest than any single portrait could ever provide.